Welcome to this Explainer Masterclass. Today, we're going to completely break down the complex machinery of macroeconomics into intuitive, easy-to-grasp modules. We're literally looking under the hood of the entire economy to see exactly how spending, interest rates, and government policies interact to either drive explosive growth or, trigger a recession. We're taking those incredibly dense economic theories and translating them into a totally logical roadmap.
Okay, let's dive right into our syllabus. We're using 5 independent mini-classes to build a complete picture of the economy. We've got income and spending, government and fiscal policy, the goods market, the money market, and finally, the ISLM equilibrium. Let's get started.
Module 1, Income and Spending. We are kicking things off with the absolute foundational building blocks of aggregate demand. Right out of the gate, there's a simple but incredibly powerful feedback loop at play in the economy. The amount of money we spend determines how much is produced, right? But the amount produced determines our income, which in turn determines how much we can spend. To make this super practical, imagine you get an extra dollar. If you tend to spend 90 cents of it at the grocery store, your marginal propensity to consume, or MPC, is 0.9. This MPC is literally the engine of the consumption function. People don't just spend randomly. Consumption is locked to income. And whatever fraction you don't spend, like that remaining 10 cents, well, that's just your marginal propensity to save.
And this brilliantly illustrates the multiplier effect. Stanford researcher Robert Hall estimated that in the real world, $1 of autonomous spending actually generates about $1.7 in total economic output. How? Well, because of that marginal propensity to consume we just talked about. One person's spending immediately becomes another person's income. When a business spends $1 million building a factory, the construction workers get paid. Those workers then spend 90% of that cash on groceries and rent. Then the grocer and the landlord spend a fraction of that income. The whole thing just ripples outward, multiplying the initial impact.
So, to wrap up our first module, just remember these core takeaways. Spending dictates output. Our consumption is directly tied to our income, and the multiplier ensures that any initial spending absolutely ripples through the entire economy.
Module 2, Government and Fiscal Policy. Let's see how our economic engine shifts when we add the government into the mix. So in the real world, we aren't just consuming and saving. We also pay taxes, and the government buys goods and sends out transfer payments, like unemployment benefits. The absolutely crucial point here is that a proportional income tax acts exactly like a shock absorber. It naturally flattens that multiplier we just learned about, keeping business cycles from getting too extreme. Think about it. If a massive economic boom hits and incomes skyrocket, people naturally pay more in taxes. That cools down their disposable income and prevents the whole economy from overheating. Conversely, in a recession, incomes fall, tax burdens automatically shrink, and transfer payments naturally rise. The government stabilizes the economy without having to pass a single new law. Looking neutrally at history, the 2009 fiscal stimulus package is a textbook example of using government purchases and the multiplier to actively fight a severe recession. When private investment plummeted, the government stepped right in with autonomous spending. They were trying to artificially jumpstart that multiplier ripple effect to push the aggregate demand schedule back up.
To wrap up Module 2, the big takeaways are that fiscal policy directly moves the economic needle. However, taxes dampen the multiplier, and budget deficits naturally fluctuate with the cycle. A deficit doesn't always mean a massive new policy. Sometimes it literally just means the automatic stabilizers are doing their job during a downturn.
Module 3, the goods market, or the IS curve. Welcome to the arena where we finally introduce the power of the interest rate.
Up until now, we've kind of treated investment as a fixed, boring number. But in reality, investment is highly sensitive to the cost of borrowing money. Let's make this practical. Imagine a farm business deciding whether to borrow money to buy a brand new tractor. If interest rates are sitting at 10%, that loan might eat up all their projected profits. No way they buy it. But if the rate suddenly drops to 2%, buying that tractor becomes a fantastic financial move. When borrowing costs drop, planned investment spikes. Interest rates dictate physical investment.
This very dynamic gives us the IS curve. It slopes downward because a higher interest rate crushes investment, which shrinks total aggregate demand and income. By the way, IS stands for investment and saving. Whenever you think about the IS curve, just remember that tractor. High interest rates mean fewer tractors bought, fewer factory expansions, less aggregate demand, and for sure, lower economic output.
Okay, wrapping up Module 3. The IS curve visualizes the goods market perfectly. It proves that interest rates dictate investment. Plus, keep in mind that government spending can actually shift this entire curve to the right. If the government decides to build a massive highway system, that raises aggregate demand regardless of the interest rate, physically pushing that downward sloping curve outward.
Module 4, the money market, or the LM curve. Time to step out of the goods market and enter the realm of the central bank.
So the IS curve gives us the good side of the equation, but we still don't know what actually sets the interest rate, right? To find out, we have to look at money itself. People hold real money balances to buy things, but there's a huge opportunity cost. You want cash in your pocket to buy coffee and groceries. That's driven by your real income, but your cash earns zero interest. So if interest rates hit 10%, you are going to tightly manage your cash and lock your wealth into high-yielding bonds instead.
This exact balance gives us the upward sloping LM curve. LM stands for liquidity preference and money supply. As your income rises, you demand more money for transactions. But if the central bank has locked the money supply at a fixed amount, suddenly everybody wants more cash than actually exists. To prevent a shortage, the interest rate must rise to convince people to hold bonds instead of cash. That is exactly why it slopes upwards.
To summarize our fourth module, the money market relies on real balances, and the LM curve slopes up because higher incomes require higher interest rates to balance a fixed money supply. And just like fiscal policy shifts the IS curve, monetary policy, like a central bank printing more money, shifts the LM curve to the right, which lowers interest rates at any given income level. Module 5, the ISLM equilibrium. We have finally reached our climax, the moment where these two massive economic arenas collide. We've got our downward-sloping IS curve for the goods market and our upward-sloping LM curve for the money market. What happens when they interact? It's a brilliant tug-of-war. On one side, we have the physical economy of tractors and taxes. On the other, the financial economy of cash and central banks. Both are competing to dictate the interest rate. An expansion in the physical economy wants to drive interest rates up as people demand more cash. But higher interest rates want to drive the physical economy down by crushing investment.
Equilibrium is found right at the crosshairs of the IS and LM curves. This gives us the exact interest rate and output level that perfectly satisfies both markets at once. This single, precise point is literally the holy grail of short-run macroeconomics. It is the one and only place where the amount of goods produced perfectly equals planned spending, and the amount of money people want to hold perfectly equals the money the central bank has supplied. To wrap up our final module, the ISLM framework proves that fiscal and monetary policies absolutely do not operate in a vacuum. They interact to jointly determine a nation's interest rates and GDP. If the government passes a massive spending bill, the IS curve shifts right, boosting output. But because we slide up the LM curve, interest rates rise, which actually dampens some of that initial investment boom. Everything is beautifully interconnected.
As you step away from this explainer today, I want to leave you with this to ponder. How might the financial headlines you read tomorrow morning instantly shift this delicate macroeconomic machinery? When you see the central bank tweaking the money supply or the government adjusting tax rates, you can now mentally shift those IS and LM curves to predict exactly what will happen to economic output and borrowing costs. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep observing those economic gears turning all around you.